Jesse Wade. I came to Alaska in '64. I grew up in Permian Basin south of Odessa, Iran, Yatesville, born on a sheep ranch, and went through high school, worked in the construction, roustaboutting on drill rigs. And when I graduated from there, I went to college, played a little bit of college football, wound up scholarship at Trinity University. I graduated from there in '64. And within a week, surprisingly, I was on an airplane. I was in Morgan City, which is where I had worked out of, because it was so much better pay and overtime and free room aboard to work offshore Louisiana compared to 8-hour shifts in West Texas. And arrived, they weren't hiring for a Gulf. There wasn't any openings with this company. But he said, we're sending a crew to Alaska. He said, if you want to go, I'll send you, because they knew me and knew my work history with Reedy Bates, is who it was with. But I had to leave Morgan City, go to West Texas, and get what I thought was some winter clothing out of Odessa, and drive back to Iran and go to the Houston airport. I think it was within 2 or 3 days max. And I was on a jet airplane, 4-engine, big jet. I'd never been on a commercial airline, certainly not on a jet. And went from Houston to Chicago, Anchorage. Landed in Anchorage, bus, it was in the evening, dark. There was a bus there that took a group or a cruise of us men from the airport to the dock for crew boats. And we drove through town, and the earthquake was quite obvious at that time. A lot of damage and everything, and surprisingly, streets, one side of the street would have a elevation that might be 6 to 8 feet above the pavement level. I went to work on the Vidmac exploration jackup rig, and I think it was an Amoco well, meaning one of I don't think it was Baker. I think it might have been a Shell, come think of it, exploration well. And we would ride the crew boat from that jackup rig in the evening. I was young, to what's called Shaky, the 3-legged platform, the Amoco, and play poker. And then go back and do a 12-hour shift at the rig roughnecking. Where was I staying? Well, on the rig, it had living quarters. It was a tender service, meaning a barge that had living quarters on it, mud pumps and pipe rack deck and all that. And when we'd go on our days off, we would go to Soldotna, which was a camp base for about maybe 4 trailer units that were not like trailer houses, but camp units, and maybe 1 or 2 bunkhouses. And we were also fed, just like on the platform there, as well as having, of course, sanitary and showering and stuff like that available. Well, as usual, when you finish your year of school, you're low on money. And so I just went as fast as I could to the Gulf Coast because that's where I'd made my better money, roughnecking. And went there and stayed there 3 or 4 days waiting for a job opening show up on the Gulf. I had worked on several rigs there. One of them was an inland barge of 15,500 feet. Another one was the Mr. Louis, which was the largest jackup rig that existed at that time. And it was also the furthest out exploration well in the Gulf at that time. But it was only out 90 miles from what I think I remember. But it took, when I first went there, out of Morgan City, it took, I don't remember if it was 9 or 12-hour boat ride to get from Morgan City out to it. It wasn't a speed crew boat. It was actually a World War II minesweeper, converted into a service boat, kind of. So anyway, back to coming to Alaska. I worked up here until December. I was one of the last men, other than supervision people, who was on the rig and we mobilized it or demobilized it for winter and took it to Seldovia. And I, in my scope of thinking, had a pocket full of money at that time and went back, just went right into graduate school. That was in December when I went back and went right into graduate school at North Texas State Teachers College, which is now North Texas University of Texas. And went there and, I don't know, did probably 10 or 12 credit hours of graduate work. I run out of money again. So I came back to Alaska. They knew my work experience and functionability. And worked up here for maybe 2 or 3 months on a rig up, which was the Baker platform. I don't know, but I think at that time it had been converted from a 3-legged platform to a 4 or 5-legged. But anyway, I stayed there till maybe a month or two, and I learned how to weld. But I quit because I was welding with a man who taught me a lot. Came back to Odessa, Texas, took a welding class or two, went to Cleveland, Ohio, to Lincoln Electric welding school, picked up added knowledge and skill. Reading, I was academic pretty good back then, and read a few metallurgical and fitting books, and worked in the winter in Cleveland, Ohio, which was more colder winter that I'd ever experienced. More colder there, it seemed like, on Lake Erie than the North Slope was. But then we learned how to dress and function within the weather. And I worked for school, was in the morning, and I worked either a night shift, evening shift, or a morning shift at the Austin Manufacturing Company, or Austin Fabricating Company, which was the oldest fabricating company in the United States at this time or that time. If it's still in business, I have no idea. Then I came back to Ariane and rigged myself up a camper, built a camper, and drove back to Alaska. was seeking welding job as a professional welder. And I don't remember exactly. I think I got a job on an exploration wildcat out at Ugassic, which is out, I guess, pretty close to King Salmon. And it was no roads or anything to it. And I flew into there as the only passenger in the Hercules, because they flew that rig in there. And of course, it had several trips, and I rigged that rig up as a welder, repairing or whatever. It was getting some good experience. And I was taught some pretty good welding knowledge and tricks from my hometown, from a personal friend welder who was well known as a professional welder artist. When that job was over with, I came back into town. I don't know, it might have been 2 months or 3 months. And I was seeking another job as a professional welder. And that was in I believe, summer of '65. And there were many platforms going in, like the Trading Bayfield, which had probably 3 at least, Dolly Varden, the Grayling, King Salmon, and Monopod. And there was some more platforms going up on the Granite Point, and Shell had already started that Shell A. And they were having trouble because Browner Root was doing some of the platforms and McDermott was doing some of the platforms. And at that time, they had a very strenuous qualification test for welders, which was super low temp steel. And they had tested, from what I understood, all the welders they had available out of the unions, whether it was pile drivers, iron workers, plumbers and pipe fitters, or any other segment that had welding craft skill. There was a boom at that time of putting in these 4 or 5 platforms at the same time. And of course, I was non-union, and they had a welding school shop there in Anchorage, and you'd hang out there because they could test welders for people or oil companies who wanted them tested. And I was there, and so they said they were testing. They run out of welders that could make this super low temp steel test. And I made it, and a lot of them busted it. You had to take a test by an inspector from Louisiana before he would let you take the real test, the super low temp test. I don't know if it's because of the expense of that or not. Super low temp is what metallurgical quality steel that they developed, from what I understand, for the submarines that go under the Arctic Ocean. And that's what these platforms, I think, are supposedly made out of, or for at least the base structures. And so I went out there on a crew boat that evening or that night after I made that test, and a crew boat to the monopod on a tender, which is where the living quarters were, for Browner Root. And they zipped me up. The platform had been set, but the superstructure, all the structure was just up there in pieces. I went up there. Great big guy from Louisiana, a big thick cigar and a baseball cap on because everybody else had hard hats. Said, "Are you the welder they said out here?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And I was still pretty young then, very young. Maybe 25 or 24, I don't know. And first thing I had to do is go, well, the 3 pad eyes on the deck section is about 2/3 the size of this structure right here from the grating to the wall. 3 pad eyes on super low temp. He said, "Here, give them to me," and said, "I have a fitter that'll tack it in place to fit it for you. You get them welded, you come back and tell me." So I did. Next thing I know, I was nervous because it had a lot of structured beams underneath it, like 24-inch major beams and then 16-inch cross beams, all back and forth. And I just picked it up, and I was there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, a month maybe, I don't know. Bad rainy season that year. I never knew anything about welding underwater, but I did because it was raining and the decks would have water standing that high, and they said, "Weld it." Extremely different. The safety factors, OSHA, and everything was kind of transformed. And the speed and mode of working on the drill rig and everything was kind of like, now it's kind of like slow motion. 2 guys that worked on it when it was regular roughnecking from West Texas or Gulf Coast. And the rigs are so much bigger and better and newer because it costs so much money to have crews and everything servicing a bush job like on the North Slope. This company hired me to go up on the North Slope and sent me a ticket to Fairbanks. And I got on a DC-3, the only passenger in that one too, on a jump seat, because it was a cargo plane, pipe, groceries and stuff for the camp, which it was cat trained in there by, I think what I understood was Tennessee Williams. And it was tracked in there, I don't know where they started, but I'm assuming it was probably a little bit north of Fairbanks. I don't know that for sure, but anyway, it was a good experience. It wasn't, by that time, you learn how to dress and function within the weather and be comfortable. And I did. This rig was battered and shaken up pretty bad. It was from West Texas, around Odessa. I can't think of the name of the company, but there is a postcard that has the name of it. Laughlin Brothers, I think. But the type of steel that was used on the rigs in the South, something like, maybe you refer to pipe as A41, Schedule 80. If it was dropped on the ground from 3 or 4 feet high and not landed uniformly down, like one end before the other one, it'd break because it'd be that cold. And I worked on that rig because the tool pusher or superintendent was the one I worked for out of Ugashik. And he wanted me to go up on that one, so I did, and it worked out fine. Right through the middle of right in the winter, because that's when they had to drill. They couldn't drill during breakup they had to shut the rig down at that time because it's on permafrost in piers, and it would settle and make a mess, get a lot of bad humps or stuff. I don't know. I wasn't there when they redid it. Anyway, I was on that rig and got it rigged up, welding wise. And they got ready to spud in, and they had some conductor pipe that was probably, I don't know, it might have been 24 or 36, and about 1.5 or 2 inch wall. And when they got ready to spud in, they had me cut about a 2 foot long splice collar for it. In other words, cut it, split it in half, and back bevel it, as well as the original one. And what they were making was a drive shoe. And when I mean back bevel it from the outside in, so it would cut down through whatever, permafrost, mud, trunks, roots, or whatever, to get down to a suitable drilling formation. And they set it over there and started down the hole. And they weren't they weren't making any footage with the pile driver. And they would pound on it for 10 or 12 hour shifts and so on. Maybe you get a little bit like that. So they finally decided, well, we'll just go in and drill. So they put the big bed on, went down in the hole, and the rig could tell the instant it hits metal. And so they hit metal, and they knew it, and they come back out. And so they jet pumped the settler clean and jet pumped out of the pipe and got it, down to about nothing but ice down there. And I went on that with a cat line rope around my hip and a cutting torch and a light, and we went down that well. I don't know, 12, 15 feet. And
That happened today?
Huh?
That happened today?
Would that happen today? Oh, no. I don't think so. I don't think they're safety things. The safety insurance and problems they have with injuries so expensive, they'll do anything to keep everybody safe, which is good. And I went down there with a cutting torch, and I cut every piece that I could see that was toward the inside of the hole or the well. And when I got it done, and I don't know if I cut out and made a 5-gallon bucket on a rope. I'd cut the pieces out, put them in a 5-gallon bucket, have them bail it out. And same way with muck, trying to make sure that I was through the ice and the mud or whatever was down there. Because when they pump mud in there, the mud is, warmer. It's kept warm, and it will melt what they were trying to drill into, which was permafrost. But I don't think they anticipated that it would be stronger, tougher than steel. So this 2-inch wall, or might have been 3 or 4 by the time I put that doubler plate on there, it shredded that conductor pipe. And I cut it out. I don't know if I got them 5 feet or 15 feet. It was just a job. Oh, it was Discovery Well of Prudhoe Bay number 1. I was on that well, but let me tell you the story of how it happened. I left there about the end of March because I had a contract job with BJ Services that was going to bring a tender up and do the mud work or cement or whatever for a Texaco platform. So I left, and they were down maybe 3,500 or 4,000, but they shut the rig down after that time because they had to shut down for breakup. So then, what I understand, they went back up there in probably November, maybe October. I don't know how cold, how fast it gets up there, because I don't think I paid any attention or I've been up there since then a time or two, but the time it was freeze up for them to go back and start that rig and that vibrating of that rig and everything over their basic foundation, which held the rig up and all that, and the living quarters and everything. And they went back up there whenever it was, and they went on down to, I believe, I understand, maybe 75, 78, maybe 8,000, maybe 85, I don't remember when. And that's when they discovered the oil of the Prudhoe Bay number 1. I was too busy within my own world. I never did go back up there at that time because I had a lot of work in the Cook Inlet. And I had continuous work. I went from Shell C rig up. I went from Anna rig up to Shell C rig up. And then me and 2 other welders, they took from about a 20 welding crew from C, when it got rigged up enough spud in, over to Shell A and did all the modifications and plumbing on a Cooper Bessner, which is a large gas compression pump that would pump gas down the well to charge the formation to maybe enhance the production of oil. And I was on that for quite a while, and I was in business for myself at that time, and Shell and BJ Services in 68. I bought license and everything. And started doing more expansive contract work for the people like Shell, Amoco, Marathon. For the welders, I brought up quite a few welders from time to time. When I had awarded a contract for one platform, I think it was several welders, and I brought most of them up because they had to be tested and certified. And my business thrived pretty well through the 70s and 80s. And I had built a shop myself, and acquired a SME U-stamp, which is American Society of Mechanical Engineers, which is hard to kind of get those U-stamps or the qualifications to be able to manufacture pressure vessels. I had a U-stamp and a PP stamp, pressure piping, certified. And they had to you had to come out of Pittsburgh, which is where their headquarters were, and it cost money to get them up here because they had to have one or two guys come up here to test you and I was the engineer. I was pretty sharp academically back then. And by that time, I said, "Fooey on graduate school," because it was going good for me at that time. When projects happen in the Cook Inlet, and they seem to come in a stream of them, when they discover some kind of a method of enhancement, they will install it, whether it's water flood or gas injection or whatever. And so projects, which are not snap your finger and you did it, it's not a one pipe weld operation. It's probably about a 3 to 4 month, maybe even goes longer than that for some of those modifications on the platform. And I was having approximately a year-round average of 70 people year-round working for my company then. And I had manufactured the highest rated pressure vessel ever made in the state of Alaska. And it may still be the highest pressure rated. It was a 2H wall, and it was for the steelhead. And I also manufactured some of the largest pressure vessels. My shop had more fabricating equipment than most any other shop in the state of Alaska. Shears, plate roll, press brake, iron worker, medium metal workers, electric eye burning machines. Pretty well developed facility. And I made the largest pressure vessels ever made, and there was a picture taken of it, put in the paper, I believe, at that time. It was for Tesoro. I did turnarounds for Tesoro. I did one for Unocal, which is Agrium. And I worked for Phillips. I had people in Phillips. I had people in Tesoro. I had people, Phillips LNG, Trading Bay, Phillips Platform. Quite a few people. Well, depending on who you want to know what. First off, I have read in the paper that the taxes on the oil production on the North Slope, the state, federal, royalty or whatever, makes more money than the people who risk their money to go develop those fields. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, statistically developed. And the Cook Inlet, of course, is going down. I spoke one time at a Chamber of Commerce, probably in about mid or early 80s, and told them, because it was kind of a depressing atmosphere because there was things coming out of the oil industry there of the Cook Inlet. He said, it's all going dry, we're going to shut down and everything. And everyone was worried about it. So I told them in this chamber speaking thing at the noon luncheon, I grew up in an oil field that was supposed to have gone dry 75 or 80 years ago, and it's still producing, and it's producing pretty good. A well at my hometown in the Yates field, developed by Ohio Oil Company, which became Marathon Oil Company, had a free flow production rate of 198,000 barrels a day. The whole Cook Inlet, it might have made that much. I know that there was a lot of race of different platforms that would try to outproduce each other, especially if they were in the same unit type operation. The oil companies, just like the North Slope and the Cook Inlet, divide out partnership agreements to spread out the risk and the benefit of the profit. And like the Cook Inlet Trading Bay unit, one company would own 44% of it, another company would own 44%, and another one would own 12%. And they would take over different service responsibilities, like operating helicopters, or operating the dock, or operating the service boat, workboats. When I went up on the North Slope actually it was Arco who drilled that well. And they had their man was there, a tool pusher, and of course the rig. And within, I would say, 10 years, they might have had the Trans-Alaska Pipeline had been put in. And they were producing 2 million barrels a day. And I shouldn't say this, but I believe it is valid, and I've told more than one person this, and I've said it on a conference room board meeting in Houston and said it. Somehow Arco was the dumbest company that I ever worked for. You know why? After they had that production of 2 million barrels a day of oil, which they probably got 40% of it, both profit. You see what I mean? They devised up spread out their liability exposures. And they had 2 million barrel a day production for quite a few years. I don't know, maybe 10, I don't know. And at that time, the price of oil was up about $100 a barrel, or maybe even a little bit higher. And then the price of oil went down to $8 a barrel. And it created a crashing impact on the oil industry, the housing industry, the economy in Alaska, the economy in Texas, and et cetera. And so Arco actually went bankrupt with all that money they were making. I don't know, they made fancy filling stations or high-rise towers in Los Angeles or what, but they went bankrupt. They leveraged themselves too much and couldn't endure or live through the downturn. I've seen quite a few ups and downs. I'm 85. And yeah, about every 5 years. Some of them are not as drastic as other ones. So Arco needed to sell their interest in Prudhoe Bay. And the only ones that were looking at buying it at that time, I don't know if that was the only one, but the one that was negotiated to buy it was BP. So they had to get approval from the federal government. And the government says, no, we don't want that much production in the hands of a foreign entity. So then that was shot down. And the next thing you know, they made a sweetheart deal, or I considered it a sweetheart deal. I don't know the details, but I know about sweetheart deals in the oil industry. They made a deal with Phillips Petroleum. They bought it. And when you make a deal for stuff in the ground, abstract assumption, you don't get current market value of $8 a barrel, which is what it was at that time. You may go down to as low as $1 a barrel. And I've read that in a book about the oil industry. And so Phillips was able to acquire Arco's interest in the North Slope. And when they did, they held it for the price of oil, probably manipulated from Saudi Arabia, had gone down to cause the $8 a barrel oil. And within 2 to 3 years, it was back up up to $124 a barrel. So you see what I'm talking about? The world's largest cash windfall in the history of world economics, I'll bet. Now, and that would have been the worst. I never did get hurt by any of the ups and downs because I had seen it happen so many times in the oil industry. I invested in things like housing and real estate in Anchorage, 30 cents on the dollar back then. Same thing in Phoenix. And held them for quite a few years. Made money off of leasing them or renting them and sold them back up to original market value of 100 to 110% of what they originally sold for, which they were usually about $160,000 or $70,000 a piece. And if you get them for 30 cents on the dollar, you see what I'm talking about. In about mid 80s, there was a news announcement of an exploration wildcat that was found in what I think you'd call upper North Cook Inlet, toward more Anchorage than the ones that are in the Cook Inlet now. And it was labeled the Sunfish Find. And it was supposed to, in the paper, probably be in the record of the Anchorage Times or something like that back then, which would have been in mid or late 80s. So at that time, by the time the North Slope had been going pretty good and developing a lot of that 2 million barrel a day production shipping, the native corporations, the lands claim settlement, I think did a very fortunate and very good. And they had a lot of money, royalty money, billions. And they might not have been too sophisticated to begin with, but they had the money and they had the leadership that hired the sophistication to accomplish development. And they did. And they came down to Kenai and spent, from what I've heard, quite a few $1 million just establishing a presence, which means, let's assume ASRC is one of them, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company. And I'm not sure if it was Peak, but I think it was Peak. And they came down and started these companies that are like my company. And there was 12, and I was one of the larger ones down here at that time, but there was 12 like start out individuals that had maybe 3 or 4 people. And they were all hit and cut out of business, like myself, by when the native investment company strength came down here, and you could not compete with them price-wise, and you still can't. Oh, it was Wade Oilfield Service Company. Anyway, in about 2 years, that 12 number of contractors down here was dwindled down to either 2 to 4. And so I kind of gave up on not making any more of the what I consider profit percentage money as when I went business, and let myself be driven out of business. And I was a little bit older then, And I had to say that's the nicest thing anybody ever did to me was drive me out of business. I had a good functioning company that I was real proud of. Had all equipment painted and a lot of it, 40 or more pieces of rolling stock. I made pipelines, a couple of good record making pipeline in the ground from Tesoro to, and before the deadline of when it was supposed to have been completed, and no overruns or anything. First time I ever saw a pipeline being laid of double jointed pipe. Pipe was saying 30 or 40 foot lengths, but I saw some of it on television. Kinder Morgan laid a pipe, and I saw they had 80-foot lengths joint. I automatic welded those joints together and brought them over to the plant, put them in the ground, and welded them up on the site. And what would take about 3.5 or more hours for a manual welder to weld up, an X-rayable pipe joint, this thing would do it in like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Actually, I can't really say that I did. In '64, I didn't, because I was on the pathway in the academic world. And I could have gone back and made C's, maybe even D's, still had a good enough GRE to, no, not GRE, that's the test you had to take to get into graduate school back then. I don't think they do that now. To go ahead and get my graduate degrees. But I decided this was a window of opportunity, and it turned out to continue to be one. There's been plenty of ups and downs in the Cook Inlet, but I don't think I ever really got hurt by any of them. Or if they were, I was prepared.